We are thrilled to have Katie Green with us. Katie is so special in her love and her sort of contemplation and telling of Hans Christian Andersen's stories. And she has taken on the task of one of the most difficult stories to tell. And I love that she's telling it because we know that most of us are familiar with the Walt Disney version of The Little Mermaid. But Katie's story really rises from Hans Christian Andersen's telling, and later she'll tell us about some of the inspirations that Andersen had for this story. By the way, that Little Mermaid that you saw is in Copenhagen. And so, Katie, we're so happy you're here and so glad that you can join Randall and Simon Brooks and myself. So here we go, off to sea.
Thank you. It's a joy to be here. Now, a long time ago, there were mer people who lived in the sea. There was a mer king. He lived in a wonderful coral castle with his mother, the mer queen, and his 6 princess mermaid daughters. Now, the mer queen took care of the daughters, and she, of course, told them stories. They learned all about the upper world, about mountains and trees and human beings, clouds and stars. And they all wanted to go to the upper world. The grandmother, the mer queen, told them, as soon as you are 15, you may go anywhere you would like. And of course, they all wanted to go to the upper world. And the one who wanted to go the most was, of course, the one who had the longest time to wait. One by one, she watched her sisters turn 15. She was the very youngest. And they would go up to the upper world, and then they would return and talk about all the things they had seen. And the young mermaid, the little mermaid, would listen, and then she would go and sit in her garden and pretend that she had been the one who had been to the upper world. She was always a little odd, quiet. Even her garden was odd and different. While her sisters' gardens had interesting shapes like dolphins or whales, the littlest mermaid's garden was a simple round red circle. She said that she wanted her garden to look like that giant star, the sun. And from underneath the sea, that's what the sun looked like at sunset, a giant red pillow. Well, her 15th birthday came, and her grandmother, the mer queen, called to make her ready. She put a crown of pearls on her head, and she clamped oyster shells onto the mermaid's tail. Ouch! That hurt! Hush now! And the mermaid was rising through the water as light as a bubble. When her head broke the surface of the water, it was sunset. And she watched the sun go down into the sea and laid back in the waves to watch the sky turn into a kaleidoscope of colors: gold, turquoise, pink. And then the stars came out one by one. Oh, the mermaid wished that she could just continue to rise up through the air the way that she had come through the water. She wished she could go and be with all those stars. But she heard a sound, and there was a boat nearby. She swam to the boat, and the waves were just large enough to allow her to peek into the portholes. There was a party. It was a birthday party for a prince. He was very happy, and everyone seemed to like him. It was his 16th birthday on that very day. The dancing continued, and then it stopped, and all of the human beings went to the deck of the ship. And then, boom! There was a loud noise, so frightened the little mermaid that she dove under the water again. And when she resurfaced this time, the sky was full of stars that seemed to be falling down all around her and were reflected in the water. And boom, another burst of light falling down. It was fireworks. And when those fireworks ended, the ship started to make ready to sail away. But there was a bolt of lightning in the sky and a loud rumble that went through the air and through the water. And at first, the little mermaid thought, maybe the fireworks are going to continue in an even more grand scale. But no, it was a thunderstorm. And the wind blew, making the waves very large. Oh, the wind came sideways, the rain was thick. Oh, but the waves picked the little mermaid up and dropped her through the air. It was great fun for her. They picked her up and dropped her and picked her up and dropped her. And she watched the ship ride to the top of the waves and then go down into the gullies again and again. And it was wonderful until a wave broke the mast of the ship. And then another wave turned the ship over and broke it to pieces. And then all of the people were jumping into the water. And well, at first the little mermaid thought, oh, maybe that prince will come down and live in my father's castle. Then she remembered every human being she had ever seen was quite dead. Oh, and she didn't want that to happen to the prince. And so she began to look for him among all of the broken timbers and people struggling. And she found him at another flash of light, hanging onto a broken piece of the mast. And just as she reached him, he lost his grip and he fell back into the water, unconscious. The little mermaid swam fast and caught him in her arms and lifted him up to the surface so that he could breathe. And all night long through that storm, she carried that young man. And when morning came, the sky was blue, the storm was over, the sea was flat. And she looked at the prince, and she brushed his hair off of his forehead, and she kissed his cheek. She saw land, and she swam over to the land with the prince, and she placed him in such a way that the waves would not wash him away and he could breathe. And then she retreated to safer, more familiar waters where she could rest, where she had worked so hard all night long. And from that vantage point, she looked at the land for the first time and saw the mountains and the trees swaying in the breezes and the birds flying among the trees. What looked like fish to her. Oh, it was lovely. And then she looked back at that young man, and well, there was a girl next to him. And that she called for help, and then more girls came, and together they all picked the prince up and they carried him into a large yellow building on a hill. And he was gone. The mermaid swam back to her father's castle, to her garden. All of her sisters asked what she saw, but the mermaid said nothing. She said not a word. But for days, she returned to that very site, hoping to see that young man again and watching the land and the stars come out at night. But she never saw the prince. So she finally stopped going there, and she just sat in her garden and was very, very sad. She would have cried, but mermaids have no tears, and so they cannot cry, and that makes their suffering all the deeper. Finally, she told her sisters, and one of them knew about the shipwreck. She also knew where the prince's castle was. And after that, The mermaid swam to the prince's castle every day, hoping to see that prince again. And she did see him on the balconies a couple of times. And there was one time where she and her sisters swam along his ship as he was sailing, and they sang to him. But he never heard them. If he did, he would have thought that their voices were the wind in his ear. Or if he saw them, he would have mistaken their long silvery hair for sea foam. The mermaid went to her grandmother, the Mer Queen. Tell me, if human beings don't drown, do they live forever? Oh, no, my dear, no. Human beings have very short lives. Not like us mer people. Why, we have 300 years to live and play in the underwater world. Oh, but human beings, and they have very short lives. And when they die, they have this thing called an immortal soul that separates from their body, not like us. When our time is over, poof, we turn to sea foam. But they have an immortal soul that travels up into the starry heavens where it stays forever. Oh. I would give all of my 300 years if I could just have one day as a human being and then live in the starry skies. Hush, 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 that's foolish talk, foolish. It would never happen. But then she noticed how unhappy her granddaughter looked, and she added, well, I have heard there is one way that it might happen, and that is if a human being should fall in love with a mer person, love a mer person more than anyone else in the world, and if they held hands in front of a priest, then the human being's soul would bubble out and spill on to the mer person, and then the mer person would have an immortal soul. But that would never happen. Forget about it. You see, human beings are stupid. They think that our beautiful fishtails are ugly. So run along, run. You have 300 years. Swim, sing, be happy. And the mermaid tried to be happy. She did. They played, they swam, they sang, and the mermaid even sang a solo, and everyone said that her voice was the very most beautiful. And she felt happy until she saw a ship go overhead, and she thought again of the prince and the chance of an immortal soul being in the sky. And she decided she would leave her father's castle and go to see the dreaded sea witch. Surely the sea witch could give her something that could help her. She went through the turbulent waters, swam over the desolate sea bogs until she came to the forest of polyps. And polyps are dangerous, dreadful things that half animal, half plant that come up from the ocean floor, and they divide again and again and again, and at the end of each limb are tentacles, long, long tentacles that are in constant motion, reaching, and anything they touch, they grab onto, and they never let go. The mermaid almost lost her courage as she looked into the forest of polyps. And she saw fish that had gone too close. She saw drowned sailors. But the most horrible thing she saw was a mermaid like herself, staring out with vacant eyes. But she gathered her courage and she braided her long hair and wrapped it round her head. She crossed her arms over her breasts and she swam through that forest of polyps as straight and true and fast as she could, and she made it. And there she was, at the home of the sea witch. It was made of bones, the bones of drowned sailors. And there was the sea witch herself sitting out front. Oh, her slimy green hair floated all around. And in her lap there were two fat yellow-bellied eels twisting over and over. She held in her hand an ugly toad, and she let it eat from her mouth, the way some rich people let their canaries eat from their teeth. But the sea witch saw the little mermaid and laughed. I see you're finally here. And I know why you've come. You want to change your fishtail for legs so that you can win the heart of a prince and have an immortal soul. Oh, well, I can make you a potion that will cause that to happen, but you'll have to drink it before the sun rises tomorrow morning while you're sitting on the land. It's a good thing you came today. If you had come tomorrow, you would have to wait a year and a day. But when you drink this potion, it will cause your fishtail to divide and shrink into what human beings call pretty little legs. Oh, but it will hurt, yes. And every step you take, you will feel as though you are walking on knives so hard that the blood must flow. Are you sure you want this? Yes. Oh, and there's one other thing that you should know. If you should fail to win the heart of the prince and he weds another, well, then your life is over. You will turn to sea foam the next morning at dawn. And there's me to be paid. My work does not come cheap. I have heard that you, my pretty, have the most beautiful voice of all the mermaids. It is your voice I'll take in payment. But if I give you my voice, what will I have left? Oh, you'll still have your beauty. Speak to him with your eyes. He's only a human being. You'll win his heart. Oh. Or have you lost your courage? So be it. And the mermaid turned, or rather the sea witch turned to the cauldron, and she poured in purple and green liquids. She scattered in starfish tongues and seahorse tails, and then she leaned over the cauldron and scratched her breast, and 3 drops of blood fell into the cauldron. The cauldron boiled and hissed louder than a steam engine, and terrible things floated up and floated around their heads and returned to the cauldron, and then it was silent. The sea witch picked up a cauldron, a container, dipped into the cauldron, and the liquid was as clear as glass, and sparkled like stars. She gave that to the mermaid, and she took her voice. And now the mermaid was mute. She could neither speak nor sing. She left the sea witch holding the container out in front, and she swam through the forest of polyps that pulled back from her. She wanted to say goodbye to her sisters, but she couldn't. She went to the castle where the prince lived, pulled herself up on the steps, and before the sun rose, she drank the potion. Felt like a hot knife was cutting her fishtail in half. The pain was so great that she fainted. And when she awoke, there was the prince. He looked down at her. Who are you? Where have you come from? There were no words. She looked down and she had legs, but she also saw that she had no clothes. She tried to cover herself with her long hair. The prince had her brought up to the castle and dressed in silks and satins, and everyone said that she was the most beautiful girl they'd ever seen, and so graceful, more graceful than any dancer. And the prince was completely enchanted. He wanted her with him all of the time. He had a large red round pillow made for her and placed outside of his room so that she could sleep there. She was his constant companion. They even climbed a mountain together. Oh, her feet bled so much that other people noticed. But that night, he slept with his head on her shoulder. And as she watched the stars come out one by one, she felt she was close to human happiness. But at night, she would steal down the stairs to the sea and plunge her burning feet into the ocean. And sometimes her sisters would come and sing to her. Now, it was rumored that the prince should marry a certain princess from a foreign land. It would be a good political move. But the prince told the little mermaid, I'll go and I'll visit that princess, but I'm not going to marry her, no. You are my very, very dearest friend. But I have decided I will never marry. I think that you have been sent to me to comfort me because of this decision. And he played with her silvery hair, and he kissed her red lips, and she dreamt of human happiness. The ship was built. They boarded the ship together. Of course, the mermaid came with the prince. And as they traveled, he told her a story. He said, I was in a shipwreck and just almost drowned, but this beautiful girl found me on the shore and she saved my life, and we fell in love. But she was at the Golden Temple, and girls from the Golden Temple never marry, so I have decided I will never marry either. He doesn't know. He doesn't know it was me. I carried him all night through that storm. I placed him on the shore. I saw that girl find him, and he doesn't know it was me. And she had no voice, and she could not speak, and she had no tears, and so she could not cry. Now, when they landed at the foreign land, the princess was not there. She had been sent away to learn all of the royal manners. And while they waited, the people on that place said that the mermaid was beautiful and more graceful than the best of their dancers. And then the princess arrived. The prince took one look at her and he recognized that she was the girl who had found him on the shore. And the princess was equally delighted, for she had been dreaming of that handsome prince the whole time that she had been cloistered. And so all day long they held hands and looked at each other's eyes and smiled. And at the end of the day, the prince returned to the mermaid. He swung her round and round and said, oh, only you, my dearest and best friend, could know the depth of my happiness. And so there was a wedding. And the mermaid was dressed in gold and silk. And she carried the train to the princess's lovely wedding gown. There was dancing after the wedding. Oh, but the mermaid never felt the knives under her feet, for she was numb with disappointment and knowing that the next morning would bring her death. The prince and the princess and the mermaid boarded the ship that would return them to the prince's homeland. And there was a beautiful gold and crimson tent that had been erected on the deck. It was for the prince and princess. They retired into that tent for the night. The ship took off, and the mermaid paced the deck all night long, sometimes stopping, reaching up for the starry sky. And as morning approached, she watched the stars go out one by one. And she walked to the most eastern deck to watch the sun rise. But instead of the sunrise, she saw her sisters come up out of the water. They had no hair. They called out, "We've sold our hair to the sea witch. Even grandmother sold hers. And the sea witch has given us this knife." They threw it up on the deck of the ship. "She says that you must plunge it into the prince's heart before the sun rises. And when his blood hits your feet, you will have your fishtail back again. You'll be a mermaid again. You can come home with us." The little mermaid picked up the knife. She felt as though time was standing still, that the world was upside down, and she pulled back the door of the tent and walked in, and she saw the prince and princess asleep in each other's arms. She held on to that knife tightly and looked at the two of them, and she could see they were in love. Her best friend was truly happy. She knew his story. She could not kill him. She ran out of that tent and she threw the knife into the sea and watched it sink in the water, leaving a red trail like blood. And then she threw herself into the sea, expecting to feel the coldness of death as she turned to sea foam. But instead, she felt the warmth of the sun, and she felt herself rising, and she looked around, and why, the air was full of beautiful, transparent forms, forms so delicate that no human eye could ever see them. And they were singing. Their voices were so sweet and so melodic that no human ear could ever hear them. And she asked, "Who are you?" And her voice was the same as theirs. And she looked down and saw her form was the same as theirs. They answered, "We are the daughters of the air. We carry the fragrance of flowers. We bring hope from war and peace from hunger. You, little mermaid, are now one of us." The little mermaid heard something. She turned, and there on the deck of the ship, she saw the prince and princess. She returned to them. She kissed the princess's cheeks. Oh, and she caressed the prince. And then she returned to the daughters of the air. And for the first time, she felt the healing of tears. Together, she joined the daughters of the air. They said, "Come, mermaid, you're now one of us. Bring your dreams and your love and your courage. And together we will rise up into the air and travel around the world for 300 years, after which we'll go into the starry heavens where we will live forever." And the mermaid, with the daughters of the air, were one. And together they rose up into the sky as a beautiful pink cloud. Now, that was a long time ago, perhaps 300 years ago. And that's the story of the Little Mermaid.